So, welcome to the May 30th, end of May, beginning of June. I can't even believe we're almost to summer. But end of May, this is the Coast Division virtual meetup. We have just a couple of agenda items. Then I'm going to do a clinic that we did in February at the Coast meetup in Richmond, but thought it was a good opportunity for folks who weren't there to see that clinic. So, just very quickly before I start, we are doing modeling on the coast in 2 weeks. So if you are doing some modeling, we're opening this up to the entire PCR. It really has been open, but we're going to publicize it this time. Send in some pictures. You can use the CoastSup Gmail. When you get the email, the email about the modeling on the coast, just reply to that email. Throw in 3 or 4 photos, 3 to 5 photos, 3 to 8 photos of your model or modeling. Throw in, please, a picture of yourself if you haven't already sent me a picture. What I'll do is I'll put those into a PowerPoint slide presentation. We had, I think, 6 presenters last time and had some really cool models shown. Some absolutely excellent models. So hopefully we'll have some good things to see on June 13th. On June 28th, I don't know why I got on this the June 8th. Let's make it June 28th, like it's supposed to be. On June 28th, we will have a modeling a coast auction that will be at the Mastic Senior Center in Alameda. We'll start setup at about 9. Check in your items about 10. We'll have a quick business meeting at noon and start the auction about 12:15. So hopefully we'll have a number of items. We have some more of the items from our donations. So we'll have all of those there as well. We will do pizza. Again, we'll probably get Costco pizza like we have in the past and have water. If you want anything other than that, you'll need to bring it yourself.
And also during lunch, there's going to be a special happy birthday to me because my birthday is June 27th.
All right, that's great. We'll be happy to have Jesse's birthday party there. Maybe we'll get a cake or something. Next, the 2026 NMRA convention is in Chattanooga, July 27th to August 2nd. I'm actually going to go. I don't know if anyone else is going. I'll set something up in the PCR groups.io and see if we can get some folks together. There are clinics, layout tours, operating sessions, typical things that you would see. Chattanooga is actually an interesting area. There are a lot of Civil War memorabilia around there as well. So anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and jump over to this little clinic presentation. And then we'll do some modeling, just general coast modeling afterwards. So very quickly, this is a presentation, like I said, I did at our meetup in Richmond a few months ago. It's actually a presentation about kind of my model railroading journey and kind of where I'm at in changes. So we'll go ahead and get started with the clinic now. So this is a clinic about what I've been doing on my model railroad, which is kind of a journey from public modules to actually having those in a layout room. So just a quick initial picture here. No need for photos, no need to screen capture. If you see anything you're interested in, you can just grab it by going on here and using this QR code or the tiny URL. I like tiny URLs because they're easy. You don't need to remember anything except for coast mod to layout. So that'll actually let you see the presentation as a PDF. So very briefly, I started my getting back into model railroading about 2015. I started consulting. I got out of big companies. Had more time, decided I really had enjoyed model railroading. I've been doing it back in the late 80s, early 90s. But one of the things that had happened was when I tore out my layout in 98, 99, in my old house, we moved to the current house we're in. it was almost emotionally debilitating. So I got back into it. I actually joined the California Central Coast Modular Group, got into ON30 modeling, then got into the ACCRS at the fairgrounds in Pleasanton. One of the things I love about modular railroading is that you can actually build modules you take out to the public, and the public gets to see great model railroads. I mean, we all get to go on layout tours and see great railroads, but the public really doesn't get to see really what I think is reasonably good modeling. So these are some pictures of some of the modules I built. The first module you can see kind of reflected my original home layout I had back in the 80s and 90s, which was a kind of a Sierra prototype based layout in HO. When I got back into ON30, my first module was kind of a Sierra themed layout. And then I began to move more to the Central Coast. The lower left is the Mission Hill Tunnel in Santa Cruz, and the right is Wilder Ranch, which is just north of Santa Cruz. So kind of the Pajaro Valley, South Pacific Coast area down in the Central Coast. We've had a game room in our house for a number of years. These pictures I actually took when I was trying to sell the pool table, so the room is not very cleaned up in these pictures. We had these when the kids were home. We had a foosball table and a pool table. It was great. It's we have a reverse floor plan, so it's downstairs. The kids could be down there. We actually set up in a bedroom next to this, a home theater, and we would have 20 or 30 kids at our house and wouldn't even know they were there because they were downstairs and didn't bother us. But as it turns out, when the kids left, the pool table began to really not be used at all. It turns out people don't want to play pool with you when you actually know how to play pool because it's not very much fun. So after some negotiation with my better half, we agreed that I could remove the pool table and use this as a train room. So this is kind of the space that I had available. It's about 300 square feet. It's not very large by some of the layouts we visited when we were in Santa Fe a couple of weeks ago. But it's a reasonable sized space. It's actually almost a second master bedroom. The master bedroom is above this. So it has a fairly large walk-in closet. It's got a bathroom, and there was a wet bar over in kind of along the wall there in the corner. So this is the space that I had available. I've become very interested as my modeling has become more focused on narrow gauge and on kind of Central California on the South Pacific coast. So my first thought process with the room was actually to build a double deck layout using the South Pacific coast. I probably don't need to describe the South Pacific coast to most of you here. It was a narrow gauge railroad built in the 1880s, ran from Alameda to Santa Cruz. It was actually standard gauge by 1910, a little bit of a slowdown from the 1906 earthquake, but it was completely standard gauge. Was abandoned in I think the 40s, the route across the mountains, and the SP who had taken it over by that point actually ran to Santa Cruz around through the Central Valley. My thought process to model this in ON30 to do it point to point, to do a double deck layout that would have a helix for two different levels, and then I could use that closet for staging. So I began designing the layout. This was my concept for a lower level layout, starting up at the top with the mole in Alameda, kind of running around through Newark, then running around a peninsula island with a view break down the middle, with then a helix that would actually use a corner of the closet to accommodate it in the room. And you notice one of the things I did was I put figures on here. There are upper and lower figures for where switching is done. I was trying to make sure that I managed it so people weren't on top of each other while they were working areas on the layout. And then the upper level continuing up through Wrights, around to Felton, which is where Roaring Camp is. And you'll notice on both levels, there's actually a spur that runs into a siding that gives some really interesting operational options on the layout, along with a Y for both of those. And then that basically continues around into Santa Cruz on the upper level. So I basically was able to get both of those together. So I was pretty much on the path of thinking that this might be the right way to build a layout and use the space, sticking with ON3, but starting with something as a completely new operation. In Christmas of 2024, I decided to set up my modules in the space. If you look at the modules here, the two corner modules are actually club modules that I used at that time. The dark green things on the ends are actually wings I had built a number of years ago that actually have two staging yards in them, and they were designed originally to go with my original 6-foot module. What you can see here is this is a 6-foot module as the first module I built. This is a 12-foot module of Moss Landing. This is that Wilder Ranch module you saw in the picture earlier. And it was kind of a nice layout. You could run around the layout. These two modules are my other two modules that were just in storage for this. So I set this up, went in the room pretty nice, gave me a space, and started, as I had it there for the next 2 or 3 months, started having some folks come over. We did a little bit of semi-operations, but it just also became kind of a social space. And one of the things I realized was I actually had space for a TV. You can see over here on this cabinet, which, by the way, the reason that cabinet sticks out from the wall is the 3 pieces of slate from the pool table are actually behind that cabinet. I actually took the pool table apart. My son and I moved the slate there, and I actually have the pieces of the pool table distributed throughout the house. So you can't actually see them, but I could reassemble it. So as I set this up and had it in place and had folks over, one of the things I realized was it was really, really nice to have people be able to be in the space and interact. And what I realized was I built the double deck layout. It was just going to be a layout room. There wasn't going to be any space for interaction. This table that we had from when I was a pool room, set it up. It was neat that you could sit there. You could put the TV on. You could have conversations. You could run trains, etc. So I started really thinking about what I wanted in a model railroad room. What I found was that my givens were really things that could be accomplished without long runs on the layout. I could have, at least 50 industry spots, realistic traffic flow. I wanted a small yard. Wasn't ever going to have a big yard in this kind of a layout. You really have to go to HO to do that. Something that was easy restaging. Something where I could have maybe up to 6 operators and a dispatcher operate the layout. But I realized this concept of a social environment was really nice. I was actually up at John Zach's layout, his Sierra layout up in Twainhart. And at one point I wasn't running a train. I went and I sat in the crew lounge, which actually has part of the layout running through it. And I realized I was there for about 20 minutes and no one else was around. And it realized that it really wasn't a very social environment where people in the layout room and kind of separately in the crew lounge. So the final thing at the bottom was getting operating quickly. As I started thinking about building a double deck layout, what I realized was that the reality of the situation is that I was not going to be able to complete this in a reasonable amount of time. Quite frankly, I knew I was getting older. And I actually started thinking about, should I employ somebody to help me build part of the layout? Should I do something to accelerate the schedule over what I could do? And as I thought about this more and more, I realized those druthers, the longer train running, longer trains over 5 or 6 cars, a large layout, really weren't things that got me really excited. I get excited about building structures, starting to build some cars and some other things. And those really didn't require a huge layout space. So one of the things I had been doing was I'd focused on this concept of Moss Landing and building this module. I've talked about it in the past. The couple of structures on there, the Daniels transfer and the sprinkles, were the 2 structures that I took to the convention down in LA. And that was based on Moss Landing. What I figured out is I was looking at a place to kind of put this module I was thinking of building. I realized that if I reimagined Moss Landing as not having closed off to the ocean in 1906, but staying open and actually being dredged, you could take the area right in front of what's now I think it's still Duke Energy power plant, and actually turn that into a pier and a cannery, etc. So as I thought about that, I realized that, that really was part of the Pajaro Valley Consolidated Railroad. So the Pajaro Valley Consolidated Railroad ran from in the north. It ran from up in the north in Watsonville and ran down to Spreckles. And it ran actually into the 20s. It was primarily used for beat movement to move beets from the beet fields to the beet processing that Spreckels had built. But it also had provided all the services for those areas as well. So I decided that that was a great prototype to use as inspiration rather than trying to model it directly, partially because, I wanted to model in the 20s. It was still in the 20s, but it was really becoming pretty decrepit at that point. It fit the California Central Coast scheme. So I decided I would model from Watsonville south with staging for the new line north to Santa Cruz and south of Moss Landing to Monterey. I also decided to make it the California Central Coast and kind of imagine that this railroad had been incorporated into something that was greater. So with that, I began to plan an island plan with modules. So this is actually what I'm building. What you can see here is there are the dark green modules. This one, and this one are actually removable. This is a 4-foot module, a 6-foot module, and a 12-foot module. I don't know why this. Oh, the 6-foot module actually ends right here. Oh, this was actually the first plan I did, and then this was the second plan I did. Sorry about that. So this is actually what I'm building at this point. So these are 3 modules that can go to train shows. These other modules are fixed. And at this end, because I decided I wanted essentially a point to loop design, but I don't have room for a loop, what I'm building is a train turntable at this end. So this is long enough to turn 5 cars of the Bachmann or at the AccuCraft size cars and a caboose and an engine and turn them as a complete train. And I'm going to build this. It's not been built yet, so you'll see that as we go through this, with the capability of having a staging cartridge so I can have some trains staged that actually can be injected into the layout in addition to the ones that get turned. So, for example, for a passenger train, you can start a passenger train in the yard, put it together, send it out, get it on the turntable, turn it around, and show it coming back from the south. So this is the south end of the layout. This is the north end at Watsonville. One of the things that I was planning to do and have done with this is to have the modules, except for this, which is a double module, actually not have any legs and just slide into supports or runners on the sides of the fixed modules. So it's easy to take them in and out. And quite frankly, I've now done a couple of train shows since I got this set up. And to take these modules out literally takes about 5 minutes to take them out and put them back in. They're very simple. You slide them into place. I have dowels to pin them in the right position. Once they're slid back, you dowel them, put a couple of bolts in them, hook the electrical up, and boom, you're back to operating. All right, you got to put the rails on. So basically, this is what I'm building. Over here, I've got some staging for Santa Cruz. So this represents the line to Santa Cruz. I've still been trying to figure out if I can put a Y in here, but I haven't been able to see a good way to do it. I just don't have enough room. So basically, the way this will have to work is trains coming out of Santa Cruz staging will have to back into the Watsonville yard. You'll notice I put a yard lead here so you can switch the yard without being out on the main and going out into this area. And I have now, you can see different switching areas. There's some switching here in Watsonville. This is the Spreckels beet factory here. This is a narrow gauge, standard gauge interchange here. There's some industries in this area. And the number here in blue represents the number of spots in that location. So I was trying to think about operations and being able to have operating sessions with this as I built it. Sierra City, here this corner, there's a lumber yard here in this area. There's a warehouse here. There's another produce plant over here, Wilder Ranch. Then the Pajaro area, which has a beet loader right here and another produce factory, produce loading, and a brewery. I'm doing a little bit of a harbor scene down here in the front because that ties into the Moss Landing, which has, the different structures on Moss Landing and a car float down here. So this is kind of the design that I'm building to. By the way, I did use a couple of meetings with the OpSig folks, with the LD SIG folks on designing things. And one of the things I did, for example, is change the way some of these things worked and how I actually got to them, and extended them across the modules. So the tail track here actually becomes a feeder to these tracks. And similarly over here, this track, which just ended previously on this module right here, now continues over to this warehouse. As part of this, I actually did a complete design for operations. I've generated a timetable, again, based on the Morro Valley and South Pacific Coast timetables of the period. You can see kind of the model area on the right there. Have laid out all the sightings and the passing sightings up at the top here, and used an online tool to actually lay out the train structures and make sure everything would work in terms of operations. So at this point, this is essentially where I'm at. You notice I did put this Moss landing here. This was really the only place I figured I could put this module. If I put it against the wall over here where it would actually have fit, you couldn't get to the backside here of the module to switch where it goes down to this car float. It would be very hard to reach the turnouts down back there. These are actually ground throw turnouts. It really is designed to be operated from both sides. So I decided putting this here was the best place. Right now, you notice I have these wings on here. They were originally designed so they would fold down 48 inch height of the layout. They were done as about 47 inches, so they could actually fold down. I've actually extended those now about 18 inches, so they're plenty long enough for 2 trains on them. So right now I can basically stage 2 trains at either end, have an operating session, but there's no good way to turn the trains, and obviously there's no yard, but that's kind of where I'm at. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the things I've done to get this ready for the complete installation. So one of the things I wanted to do was to light the layout. The room has a 9-foot ceiling in it. I decided I really didn't want to put fascias in and try to make the kind of picture frame that you see on a lot of layouts. It would really restrict the room and would be a lot of work and really wouldn't work very well. So I decided that ceiling lighting was the only answer. So I went and I looked at can lights, went to Home Depot and Lowe's and got on Amazon. And I realized that commercial cam lights were going to be really expensive. One of the things I thought through was that if you have a linear line of can lights and they point down, you're going to get a very specific shadow pattern that's going to look like there's a singular point of light. So I felt that I had to do 2 rows of lighting above the modules, basically at kind of almost the edge of the modules, so you got a more uniform lighting. So I decided that, gee, there are these 12-volt LED lights you can buy on Amazon. They're 5 watts. They're 50-watt equivalents. They're cheap. They're a couple, $3 each. I could 3D print light holders and wire carriers for that. And one of the things I decided I wanted was to do that. I decided I should have 4 different lighting circuits. And the reason for that is that you want different kinds of light. You want to be able to control the light separately. And I decided I wanted different levels of Kelvin. So I did 2 2700 Kelvin, which is kind of the soft white, what I think of as a golden light, what photographers love. One that's a 6K, which is a bright daylight, and one that actually has blue gels. So this is basically what the lighting looks like. So what you're seeing on the left here is actually the lights turned on. You can see there are these 2 sets of lights here that are facing away from us. Those are the 2700 Kelvin. This light that's bright here is the 6K Kelvin, and these fixtures here are the blue gels. These were all 3D printed with the exception of the kind of bowl here on this gel was actually a bowl from Target. So this is a picture of what it looks like without the lights turned on and with the lights turned on. And you notice what I did for the power routing was I came up with this design for essentially 4, these are 16 gauge silicon wrap wires and 1 12 gauge. So the 4 16 gauge are the feeders to the lights, and the 12 gauge is a common drain. So what that did was let me actually have each of the lights are connected to those. These are some pictures of kind of how this was done. I made these 3D printed these little carriers here that carry the 4 wires. You can't see it very well in this picture, but there's a block against the wall here that they connect to, and it brings them up. The power comes up. It's actually on the other side where you can't see it. This is the gel fixture. You can see these fixtures down here. There's basically three parts to these. There's a piece that goes up to the ceiling. There's basically a connection point here that allows you to adjust the angle of light this way. You can twist the light by how you screw it into the ceiling. And then the light bulb itself goes in from the back, and there's just a clip ring that keeps it in place. Not very clear from this picture. If somebody's interested, I can send you a better picture. These are those suitcase connectors that actually have a connector blade inside of them. And so they were all painted white. They were blue and yellow when I got them. I think the yellow were the 12 gauge and the blue were the 16 gauge. Basically, I put them all on, some masking tape, painted them all with some bright white paint, and then connected them up again using the silicon wire running over, touched them up with some paint after I got done. So when you look up at the ceiling, you really don't see these because they kind of blend into the ceiling, but it gives you a nice uniform light pattern. And you can see kind of here on the right how I did the cut those bowls I got from Target out to create the backing to go ahead and put the fixture in. So next thing we're just talking a little about is the framing and sub roadbed. So this is one of the big modules. This module is 4 feet wide. It's a little over 8 feet long. The length was defined kind of by the width of the room and where the corner needed to be on the other side. What I did was I laid out what the framing would be before I started building it, so you can kind of see. I used 1x6s and 1/2-inch plywood just from the lumber yard, and put that together. You'll see some pictures that the corner on the other side was done as a cabinet. And the reason I did that was I wanted to be able to have storage inside and have some shelves, and you'll see that in a moment. Once I got the plywood cut, and I began to do the layout of the turnouts. So I'm using fast tracks. I bought the number 5 fast tracks, both the turnouts and the Y for ON30 in code 83 because I use code 83 rail. What I found is you can take their templates, which you can get online. I download them. I actually run them through PowerPoint to scale them, and then print them out. And what that let me do is it let me actually lay out where the turnouts would be on the wood. And then I used a red grease pencil to show the lines. I didn't show a picture of it here, but I have essentially about a 2.5 foot long piece of wood that has holes drilled in it. So I can actually lay out a circular path for a bend. And they were all built with transitions, typically do about a 1/2-inch transition and about 8 inches long running into a straight section from a corner. And so this is basically what that module looked like after it was all done. You can see are all assembled and put together. You can kind of see the back, the framing, the 1x6s, blocks in the corner where appropriate. The idea is that this is going to be supported by, on this end here, it'll be connected to the wall. That's this end over here, this side over here. This end here and this end here will actually have some legs attached to them. So it's very rigid. I mean, you could get up and walk on it if you wanted to. It's very strong. On the top side, you can see this cut down here is about 2.5 inches lower. That's for my harbor area. The idea is to build it up with foam on the back side here for structures and things. And you can see again the layout of the track coming in. This is the main line that runs into the module that's next to it. One of the things I did here was to get a passing siding. One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to have an additional passing siding there. So what I actually did was I added an extra 3-inch wide quote unquote module here at the back of this fixed module that actually allows me to have a passing siding that runs all the way from here to here. So that becomes two things. It's a passing siding for generally, scheduling operations, which will handle obviously a whole train, but it also allows you to have switching for this area without interfering with the main line, which will run through this side. So it actually became a way to manage that effectively. So continuing on, here's a couple of pictures of the corner unit. This was, again, just completely assembled with half-inch plywood. I bought some 2x6s and I ran them through the table saw. I have one of those suitcase table saw, Craftsman table saws, and I keep it kind of sitting in the garage and pull it out in my driveway when I want to cut wood. I don't do enough woodworking to justify the space in my garage for a table saw, but there's lots of things you can't do any other way than with a table saw, and it works great. One of the things you'll notice is when I did this, I actually made the top a separate unit. And the reason is I really love the idea with modules. You can do all the wiring and all that without having to be underneath something. And what I realized is when I put a shelf in the middle of this, trying to get in and do wiring work would be very difficult. This is actually the front piece that goes in between them. So then the next thing was I installed, once I had these put together, and you can see that corner module here. This is the corner module actually assembled, is I bought HomeAbed. This comes from a guy bought the business. It's actually a Homasote that's cut up into a profile that kind of matches what we normally think of as a cork profile. I like it. It gives good sound deadening on plywood. That was basically just glued down where those grease pencil marks were and held with weights. You can tell that my son was a weightlifter when he lived at home, and I have a whole bunch of these weights, and they actually come in very handy for building a model railroad. So you kind of see how those pieces were put together and installed on the layout. After I got the home bed in place, what I decided was that the reality is most narrow gauge railroads didn't have a really strong ballast profile. Most of them were actually fairly shallow. So I decided to just go ahead and use Sculptamold in between the HomeAbed. So you can see here, this is the HomeAbed. You can kind of see I've got some tracks laid out here, some of the track work laid out. And in between, I've just put Sculptamold. So I find with Sculptamold, once you paint it and you put a little bit of dirt on it, it looks really good. On the right side, this corner module, I decided I wanted to have a little bit of a hill in the background, have a little bit of contour. I wasn't having a lot of contour on the rest. It's pretty flat as a layout. So that was done with foam, 2-inch foam, glued together. I tend to use Gorilla Glue for that. I did buy at one point a while back one of these Hot Foam Factory. It's just the one with a single wire. It works really good for cutting the foam. You can see I kind of took the foam there and sliced it down to get the profile I wanted using that hot foam knife. The next thing I did was I added fast track turnouts. And in doing this, I found something that was very interesting. I've done this in the past. It turns out the fast track, the ties, the DC printed ties are actually thinner than the micro engineering ties that come with ON30 Flex Track. So in the past, I've always put a piece of .020 plastic, my plastic strip, cut it down, just glue it on with ACC to the back of each of these ties. And that way the turnout height and the flex track height will match each other. When I started installing this, what I realized was that when he cut these, I bought these pre-cut turnouts from him. I decided to try that this time. And what I realized was that the pre-cut turnouts were actually thicker than the HomeAbed that he cut for the flex track. And my first reaction, I called him and I said, hey, this is a problem, dot. And then it hit me, actually I could use that to my advantage and install the flex track here and install the turnouts here without the plastic underneath them. And it turned out the height almost matched exactly. So that's what I ended up doing. So what you see up here on the upper left, this is the flex track HomeAbed. This is the turnout shape HomeAbed. And you'll notice what I've done is I've added here on the side some pieces to support the ties that go on either side of the PC tie that holds the points together. This is a slot cut for a tortoise machine. So I had to use tortoise machines because you really couldn't reach these turnouts to use ground throws. And you notice that what I've done is I've actually just taken my router and I routed this area out so that both the wood ties that go on either side of the turnout tie and the turnout tie are actually up in space. So the turnout ties are actually, the wood ties are actually on the whole bed, but the turnout tie is actually up in space. So I don't have any problems with it rubbing as it goes through there. So you can kind of see the installation technique here for putting turnouts in. I like the idea of soldering the wires on the bottom of the turnout first. So you basically solder 3 wires on each turnout. Then you figure out where those wires are going to hit on the layout, drill 3 holes, and then just install them. So what you see here is this is kind of a fairly extended piece, 2 turnouts that were made together. And you can see that they're both connected with the holes. And what I've done is I've glued down all the wood ties in the right position. I haven't worried about staining anything because I'll show you how I cover that next. So what they did is basically you just glue those down, put glue on these guys, glue them down, use some weights, and then I typically come back and put a few spikes in afterwards, but the spikes are really not very important. The flex track was glued down with caulk. I've typically used caulk. This was the first time I actually had some problems with caulk, and I had to go back and use some other glue to glue it down. But caulk has generally worked pretty well for me. So you see the same thing. The rail feeders glued onto or soldered onto the underside of the rail, run through a couple of holes, and then the rail put down with those going through the holes. One of the things is at the edge of the layout, I typically the last inch and a half, I use wood, and I put in a couple of PC ties. You notice these are PC ties. These have that plastic on them, so they match the height. What that does is where I have the joiners at the edge of a module, it now makes sure that the connection is really strong. And you'll see that in another little picture later. So, this is, again, gluing down the flex track. Same exact thing. You take the track. This is a piece of flex track with a turnout. You're not with a turnout, just flex track. You just push it down, put it on with some weights. And you'll notice here, this is that wood that has the PC ties glued to it. So what that does is make sure that at the edge, if you happen to catch it or something, you don't pull up the rail at the edge of the layout. So that basically got my basic structure complete. The other thing I did as I was going through this process was I decided where I wanted structures. I like this idea I got from Tom Farrell of you build your structures on some 1/4 inch or 3/6 inch material. I used plywood and masonite. What I do is I wrap those with saran wrap, with the plastic wrap I get from Costco. Screw them down with a couple of drywall screws where I want the structure, and then put the Sculpta mold around it. What that does is allows you to remove the wood, build the structure on the wood, and pop it back in. The only thing I would suggest is if you do this, after you take the wood out from the Sculpta mold, run it through your table saw and take about a 64th to a 32nd off of each side. So it's a little bit smaller in the hole and it fits in really easily. The advantage with this is if you ever decide to take your layout out, it's really easy to just pry those up and peel them off. So you can kind of see over here on the right, this is that corner. You can see it's now been assembled. There's a shelf in the middle and a shelf on the bottom. It's a great place to store lots of stuff. And then it has the track up here. There's another track piece that goes on the center from either side, and those are not installed yet because I really couldn't install those until I actually got it put in place. So this one down here is the bigger module, and you kind of see all the tracks again on that. The next step was I basically painted everything with Rust-Oleum, the camouflage earth brown. It's a great basic color for your ties and your track. So this is spraying just the whole thing. Everywhere you've got a track laid down, a turnout, hit it with a Rust-Oleum camouflage coloring. The turnouts are all powered by the tortoises they're connected to, so I don't have to worry about connectivity on those. Works out very well. So you can kind of see what it looks like. One of the things I find is if you just take a paper towel, dip it in a little bit of paint thinner, get a little bit of paint thinner on it, hold it on your finger and run it on the top of the rail. You can get most all the paint off the rail as you do this process. And then when you get done, you just hit it with a bright boy and it gets nice and clean. Um, in the past, I've actually used an airbrush to color the ties to change colors. But I've started using more and more pan pastels, and I decided it would be interesting to try pan pastels for tie shading. So what you see here on the left is basically what it looked like having put the pan pastels on. They were daubed on with a brush. You can see just the basic on the right here is the basic earth brown. And on the left, you see I've colored a bunch of ties. And then you can see over here, after those ties have then been sprayed with essentially clear coat. It's not dull coat, it's the matte you get from Home Depot, the Rust-Oleum or whatever brand it is, matte color. And you see that you get a little bit of tie variance. And I think that's really important when you do your layout to make the ties vary a little bit. The last stage on rail, because this is obviously early days and it's iron rail, is all of the flanges were then they're brown from the earth brown. They were then painted with thin flocal rust. You basically use a thin brush, a number one very small brush, dip it in the flocale paint, just run it down the rail. It also tends to hit the spike heads. Doesn't look quite as realistic here where you've got the PC ties, but you can kind of see the effect you get of the rail looking like it's rusty. Bit of work there to do it, but when you see later in photos and that of a scene, really improves the photos and the way the scene looks. So the next stage was wiring. Obviously, all the connection wires were underneath the layout. So what I really need to do now is connect them into the DCC system and do the wiring for the turnouts. So what you can see here in the picture is how I typically have done. And the beauty of obviously of a modular layout is I'm doing this on its side. I'm sitting on the floor and I'm not getting solder dripped on me. If I blow it and drip solder, it just drips harmlessly on the wood. But you'll notice there are two buses here. The red and the black are the buses. They're installed with little eye bolts on either end here, and then hold taut and just twisted. They're connected then into the DCC Power. I use this zip cord. It's 12 gauge, Chinese 12 gauge. It's really 14 gauge red-black zip cord. It works out great for wiring runs. We used it at the ACCRS on the O-scale layout to rewire in Pleasanton. You get a 500-foot spool for I think about 60 or 70 bucks. So it's very inexpensive. So I've used that where I needed to run the wiring between. But on the layout modules, I actually run, this is a 16 gauge, just standard copper stranded wire. What I do is I've got one of those wire strippers that you basically put the wire in it and it cuts the wire, and as you squeeze it, it separates the piece you put off. What I found is if you take this wire and about every 6 to 8 inches, after you've installed it, after you put it in place, you go back and do that, it'll squeeze the insulation. The insulation actually compresses and you open a little space. You do it afterwards because you notice these are staggered. They're not at the same location. So that makes another reason they'll never ever touch. What you're able to do now is just take the feeder wires, which you'd pre-assembled, strip them, just go to the closest appropriate point, wrap them around, then hit them with solder, and it's a good solid joint that'll never change. I'm not really a huge fan of suitcase connectors, and this seems to me doesn't take any more time, and it's a much more, I think, long-term effective way of keeping the wires in place. The other thing I did was put the turnouts in. One of the things that I saw in a clinic the guy did on building modules out of gator board was using this. This is a 3M. It's actually a trim. It's a two-sided tape they use for automotive trim and other things. So it's incredibly strong. And what you do is you put that on the turnout, and then as you put the turnout motor in place, this actually glues to the wood. And you'll notice here it's glued onto this piece of masonite that I used in this area because I'd actually cut a hole up above here because I wanted an indent in the landscaping. You notice the turnouts motors, show this in the next picture. Actually, I'm using a Cat 5 cabling plan, and these are RJ45 connectors that are epoxied to the top of the tortoise, and then they're connected with soldered and punch downs to the 8 pins. That allows me to have a Cat5 connector. It makes it really easy to change the tortoise if one fails, but also, as you'll see, it makes the wiring easy. The other thing I did was I did put in DC wiring. I have DC power distribution. This is a 16 gauge zip cord that I use for that. You notice it terminates here in a couple of Euro connectors, so you can connect local lighting, local things that need lighting, buildings, etc., into it. This is actually the schematic of that corner of the corner module, the Wido Ranch module, and the Barra module. So this was something I actually did for my AP certificate, an electrical AP certificate. So it kind of shows you, the DC panel feed comes in here, that feeds through Molex connectors between the modules, and then feeds through the whole unit. This is kind of the corner wiring. It was done basically the same way, except I didn't worry about having a bus because really no reason to have a feeder. It was just done with a little terminal strip I bought a long time ago on eBay. I think they were actually from Russian satellites or something. So basically the feeder wires are soldered onto that. What's interesting here is you can't see the way these Cat5 connectors work. And this corner, because I had a corner block here, it turned out there wasn't enough room for a tortoise. So I've used one of the MP10s from Seth Newman's company from MRS, Model Railroad Control Systems. They operate just like a tortoise, so it's just essentially a plug replacement. And what I did was essentially just took a little Euro connector, cut one of those off with 5 connections. I'm not doing any signaling. Obviously, it's narrow gauge. You see, these are the feeders here for the track feeders. They run in. Those then feed up to the connectors here on one side of the tortoise. I'm using the tortoise for track power. It's ON30, so it's essentially equivalent to HO in power needs. And then the other two are feeding the motor circuit in. This is the motor circuit, which feeds from a control panel I'll talk about in a moment. One thing is if you use these connectors, you want to use the B connector colors. Those actually match the pinout of a Cat5 cable. What I did was bought some 3-foot Cat5 cables and just cut them off to get these short pieces. So if you want to change the turnout out, it's change the turnout motor. If it fails, it's really easy. Just pull the connector. I did put a couple of screws in. I wasn't quite willing to trust that two-sided tape forever. I put this in as well. This is just a schematic of how those turnouts work and how they connect up. So the next thing I needed to do is do a backdrop. I had a corner in the building, in the room that was about 12 feet long, kind of went through a corner, and I decided I wanted to put a backdrop there. And you'll see in a moment why I just wanted to put a backdrop to start with in that area. What I did was I went down to Moss Landing and I took a couple of panoramic photos using my iPhone 16. This is just north of Moss Landing. You kind of see I wrapped around. It's a pretty big photo. It's 9918 by 3928 pixels. That was actually edited using Photoshop into two 300 DPI 2:1 images in Photoshop. So this is basically the two sides of that. And if you'll notice back here, you'll notice there are some power poles and some other stuff. There's actually a house up on this hill, things you can see. Those have all been edited out of these photos. You can use Photoshop. It's pretty easy to edit those things out. These two were designed to install as print as two images and be aligned during installation into a continuous image. Turns out when the day I took the picture, you can't see any hills in the background. It was kind of a clear day, but you have a little bit of ground mist or whatever in the background. These were printed as polypropylene banners at Office Depot. Typically about $75 each for a 3x6 banner, $55 on sale, and they worked out pretty well. So this is then going to go on a corner of the room. So I decided I didn't want to cover these windows with backdrop. I'll show a picture in a little while of that. There's a pretty nice, about 20-mile view out of those windows. Felt like the light in the windows were important to the room. I made a decision. I'm not sure it was a good decision to keep these curtains, these blinds that we had in place there. So I went ahead and built a box to go over them. So they actually stayed in place. And then on the walls, I decided I didn't want to connect directly to the walls because when I took this down, if I glued something to the walls, it was going to tear the walls off and be a mess to replace. So what I did was I bought some really cheap Luan plywood and nailed it with some 1 penny nails into the studs. So that provided a place to glue the backing onto. And I decided to use linoleum as the backing, as you'll see. So that protected it. And I painted the top blue so that if any of it showed above the skyline, you would see it as blue. And then I painted this corner down here green to match the green that I was painting all the modules with. For the corner and coming off of this piece back to this wall, I cut foam pieces, cut a template, and then used again that foam knife to cut a bunch of those so that I could run linoleum along them so it would run smoothly from this area back to the wall, coved around the corner, and over to this side. You can also see in this picture, these wires here are the feeders to the lighting, and they run up. These are boxes I 3D printed that they run into, and they're actually designed to hold tension on these wires. Then they feed the wires down. Those were run through the gaps. When I put the plywood up, I left some gaps here, and those were designed to run those wires through. Turns out it's a bit of planning to do this stuff. If you want to do it, you can't just kind of throw it together. So I actually glued linoleum using flooring cement to the plywood. So this is linoleum. I put the finished side in, the backing side out to glue those panels to. I put some staples in place to hold it and then pulled those out before I did the backdrop. And again, I painted the top of the linoleum here blue with a blue color that kind of matched, and along the side here that kind of matched the blue color that was on the prints that I'd gotten. One thing was interesting about this, I did a similar technique when I built my layout back in the late 80s in my home at that time. I bought linoleum and I put it as my backdrop, and I actually did coving up to I had a drop shelf in an 8-foot room, so it was kind of a shadow box effect. And I did coving. I'd seen this at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, where they put coving right up at the corner at the ceiling. And when I bought linoleum back then, it had a paper backing. All linoleum I found today was essentially had a call it for lack of a better word, plastic backing. So you can see here, this is the back of linoleum. The other side I'm going to show you, you'll see in a moment. I'm actually going to put another backdrop, and I've been thinking about painting that backdrop instead of trying to do it as a photo backdrop. I'm not sure the photo backdrop added as much as I thought it would. But I'm not quite sure how you paint on this because it's not a really smooth surface. So the next step was I glued into place those two banners. And I actually positioned everything using a laser level. So I established the level I wanted for the top of the plywood. And then I used that laser level. I used that to actually install the banners onto linoleum. I'd used it to install linoleum, put a line there. And then once I got that all done, which I didn't take a separate picture of, sorry about that, I installed the module. So the module you can see here now has the legs underneath it. It's screwed into the wall here at the backside. It's just right underneath. It's like a 1/16 of an inch underneath the linoleum here. So the linoleum is actually above the module in all these areas. So I can just run Sculptamold right up to it, paint it, and it'll blend in fairly well. You can see here, this is the laser level. You can see the laser level line, which I've set not at track level, but actually at the level of the wood, because that actually allowed me to manage getting all these things to the same level. By the way, one note here is if you decide to use these banners, the ink is water soluble. So I had a little bit of cleanup I had to do on some glue, and I went to clean it up, and I realized that, oh, you got to be very careful. It turns out you really can't see it. So this is basically what that backdrop looks like in the room after it was done. You can see the joint lines right here. You can kind of see it. You can't see it too well. The one thing that I found was after I got this all done, I got a little bubbling in the backdrop. I'm probably going to go back up with the bubbles. A couple of them are up in the sky area. I'll probably take my airbrush and turn them a little bit into clouds. But you can kind of see the view out the windows here and why I wanted to keep this space open. And this is basically this module, the corner module, and this is where that 4-foot module goes in between them. I put in a couple of pictures of the backdrop, kind of how it looks from looking at it. Um, Obviously, no vegetation yet, but I think it provides kind of a view that feels like the Central Coast. So the next thing I needed to do is some control panel. So I decided to 3D print my control panels. The turnouts back here, they were back in this area. You can't reach them. They're typically almost 3 feet back from the fascia. So using ground throws was not going to be possible on those. So I decided to go ahead and 3D print some control panels. I did control panels. This is the control panel for the area we were looking at. So you've got the Wilder Ranch side and the Paro side. And then for my lighting circuits, I did 4 circuits. So I decided to 3D print control panels for the lighting as well. I have an on-off switch, a space here you'll see for a dimmer, and then a place for layout power on and off, and a rheostat to control the dimmer lighting. These were actually done on a very simple $180 filament printer. Basically, you start printing it with silver. You put a stop in and change to black, and then I changed back to silver, so you get the different colors in different layers. And they look pretty cool when you look at them. They're illuminated. You see what I do is I built in a bunch of little holes to put 3mm LEDs, so they're illuminated. So when you turn on the layout, all the panels are illuminated. You can see them underneath the layout. So then I built a fascia frame and a box for all the electronics along with storage. So this is just basically a simple fascia frame. This is the control panel for the area, the lighting panel, and then I did a panel for my DCC power system. I'll talk about that in a moment. So kind of the parts, and that was just assembled. Then where the electronics were going to be was painted white. This is on casters. You really can't see them, but they're on those, not the casters that rotate, but the fixed direction casters from Harbor Freight. So the idea is this can be rolled in and out from underneath the layout. I was originally looking at putting a cover on this, but I decided since it was rolling underneath the layout and you couldn't see it anyway, I just leave it open. So it's just open. For turnout control, I decided to use the switches. I got these at a sale at a layout that was it's called the Dare layout back in Pittsburgh, and it's actually a lot of it's for kids to come operate, and they sell things. They sell things in their shop to support their operation. One of my friends bought a couple of tortoises there, and they were connected to these switchets, and he didn't want them, so I took them. So I had 8 switchets, and so what I did was I decided to use the switchets and do what we did at the layout in Pleasanton, which is use the single pole double throw relay modules, which allows you to have an output that is not dependent on the current capacity of the switchet. So I 3D printed these little carriers to hold those. Use these diodes to actually run the power from the switchet up to the relay to turn the relay on and off, and that controls the turnouts. So here's just a couple of pictures of the doors and wiring. Again, this was an interesting thing. I was going to go to Home Depot to buy hinges for the doors, and it hit me that I could 3D print them, and that was probably cheaper than the gas to get to Home Depot. So I actually designed and 3D printed these hinges. They just have a coat hanger wire in the middle, dot of ACC on the top. What's interesting, at one point, one of these, the wire fell out and the door was hanging on just one hinge and it worked just fine. They actually work really well. And then also you can see I did a little little finger pull here to open the door. So this whole thing is designed to slide underneath the layout right here, come in and out, and that's my control panel. And you'll see that later. So then I wired up in that all the wiring. There actually are 3 different segments to the wiring. On the left here is the turnout control, the center is the lighting control, and the right is the DCC control. So basically, each one of those was designed, for a different area of what it provided to the layout. All of the power runs through basically this is a terminal, a power strip here. And what I did was I cut that power strip and ran it through a little box here with a relay that's a latching relay. So it's a 12-volt latching relay. I just have a wall wart that powers just this relay. And when you push the button on the front panel, and I can have multiple buttons, so I can have one by the entrance to the room, one on the control panel. When you push the button, it latches the relay. That turns on the 120 volts and basically turns on the whole layout. Hit the button again, and the whole layout turns off. So this was the 120 volt was put in a can, so it's electrically protected. I got it out where someone could actually touch it. These are the turnout controls. They were basically made with the LEDs and the switch controls for the turnouts wired into these modules. Each one of these does 2 turnouts. This one here is actually for the Wilder Ranch. The Wilder Ranch module actually has a wabbit on it already. So what I did was I just remoted the wabbit to be able to initiate it and operate it from the push buttons up here, and to turn the light on here so that the lights for the panel illumination. What you can see is that these are all wired back through this runner that kind of carries them over the top to a punch down block panel. So this is an RJ45 punch down block panel. It really makes wiring very easy because you just take the wires from here, run them over, punch them down in the right place, and then you plug the Cat5 in that runs out to the turnouts. What you can see here is these are the feeder wires for this. So there's basically DCC power, and then I've got for the DC side, I'm using a plus 12 volt, minus 12 volt common. That lets you use a single pole relay to actually control a turnout, because the relay will switch from plus 12 volts to minus 12 volts. One side stays common, so that switches the voltage on the turnout like you normally expect on a tortoise when you throw a switch in a control panel. One of the things reasons I did this was I wanted by the way, you see down here, these are DC power supplies. These 2 of these are for just general power to the layout and the power, the plus and minus 12 volts to the turnouts. The third one is actually a 50 amp DC supply that runs the lighting. One of the reasons I'd used the switches was I wanted to have a remote panel. So this was actually made as a second panel that looks just like the one on the other side. But what it has a series of Cat5s that plug in over on that Cat5 panel on the RJ45 panel, plug panel. So I can have control, so you can either control this from either side of that island, which is the Moss Landing Island. I really need to be able to control the turnouts from either side of that to make it effective. And this is just a little schematic about the turnout control, and the output from the switch it and the output of the switch it with the relay in place, which I didn't show, to the tortoise motor. And these were all run through a Cat5. The lighting control is very simple. I bought some very simple dimmers. These are basically PWM dimmers that work with LED lights. They were wired in, and each of the wiring circuits runs through an on-off switch, and then allows you to dim each one individually. And then the center, I've got a light on the DCC or DC power within a couple of push buttons that actually turn it on or off. Originally, I thought I would have an on button and off button, but turns out with the latching relay, you push either button and it turns it on or off. And you kind of see again, what I did was I used this is actually just a coat hanger used as a carrier that carries that lighting power above what's below, which is the power strip and these are the power supplies for the boosters for the DCC. The DCC Power was done as a panel. What I did was I bought a number of years ago an NCE power cab. I decided I wanted more power than the power cab would give. I was concerned that the couple of amps would not be sufficient. Layout's not huge, but you still can have 4 or 5 engines running at a time and sitting and idling. So I decided I would just use this for basic power, and it powers all the turnouts. The turnouts need DCC power, but that's very low current. This is actually a ramp meter, and it's installed. One of the things I did with the ramp meter is I actually put in relays, and you'll see this on the circuit, that allow the ramp meter to look at either of 2 boosters that have 2 power districts. What I did was I used, these are the Tam Valley boosters. They sell these, they're about $50. It's about 20, 25 bucks for the power supply. They're a 3 amp continuous 5 amp booster. What they do is they just take a DCC input. So you take an input from whatever booster you have running, input it to this, and it gives you another booster. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the output of the NCE power cab, running it to these 2 guys, which gives me 2 boosters. Then what I'm doing is I'm actually set it up so that, that power cab feeds these 2 boosters, feeds the switches. The boosters then feed into a series of, those single pole relays, 2 of which decide which of the boosters get input to the ramp meter. And then I've got another 2 for each side that decide which output, either the ramp meter or directly from the booster, feeds the track. So you basically can look at either of the boosters and see what their output is to the track. And then I've got a frog juicer. This is for that turntable on that train turntable. It's going to have a frog juicer on it. So these are a couple of pictures of the circuit board. Again, easy to do this stuff. 3D printed the circuit board. Nice thing about this is the top side of the circuit board just has the individual components on it. These are the boosters. These are the relays. All the wiring is on the underside. It kind of looks like a spaghetti farm, but works out pretty well. What I decided to do was where I put this in, I was trying to figure out what to do, and I bought a really cheap lucite mirrors, 12 by 12 lucite mirrors from Amazon, and I then mounted those to the sides here of this board, and I've actually got some supports that go underneath that. Put another piece in the back and a mirror on the top. And when you look into it, it kind of is a pretty cool looking system. So what you get on the left here is the ramp meter. You choose which district that feeds to by this switch, which is just a DC power switch that feeds the relays. That switches the relays between the two ramp meters. And then these plugs down here are for the power cab. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was I 3D printed some car card pockets. So I wanted to have car card pockets on the layout. And I decided it would be, rather than trying to buy them, the little wooden ones, I would go ahead and 3D print them. 3D printer is a wonderful tool for this kind of stuff. So these were designed, and I actually put lettering on them for each of the different industries. So you basically have a pocket with the industry name. And then I did design in a place so I can put a light pick there if you put a light pick, if you're using light picks. So that works out pretty well. So essentially, this is kind of the current layout, the way it looks today. You can see the Moss Landing here with a couple of finished buildings. I have one more building to complete there. You can see back here in the background, this module doesn't really have any structures on it yet. And then these other 2 modules in place. And that's kind of it. I kind of see, again, the view out the windows here, why I wanted to keep the windows open. And that's really all it was. So again, I'll close with this photo if anybody wants to grab a link to the PDF. Any questions or comments?
Fine presentation, Phil. That was great.
Thanks.
I'm very impressed.
Hopefully, my hope with something like this is that there's at least 1 or 2 things that somebody says, wow, I could use that, or that sounds interesting to do. So
There definitely was.
cool.
It definitely was. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. What can you explain the ramp meter? What a ramp meter is and how you used it?
A ramp meter. So a ramp meter is really a way. It's an ACC detection that's actually designed for DCC, because DCC is really kind of an AC signal. It's actually a circuit that'll tell you exactly what the voltage is on the tracks. And you can use it in two ways. They make a version that's in a little plastic can, and you can use it as a test tool. It actually has a couple of connections. You can put it on the tracks, and it'll tell you, oh, it's 15.6 volts or it's 14.2 volts. The other thing about it is that actually, if you wire the track through the ramp meter, it will tell you what the current is on the tracks. So the way these are wired, because the power flows through the ramp meter, it tells you both the voltage and it tells you the current.
Okay.
So you can actually see how much current's being used by the what's ever connected to the track that you run through. If one of the things is, when we've done a lot of the setup for the modular, it's kind of you can't really get by without having a ramp meter. One of the things that's really good for, especially in modular layouts, is when you set layouts up, occasionally you get things out of phase. If, for example, if you connect the power on one end of a modular segment and you have a crossover module on the other side, when it gets to the next power district, it'll be out of phase. One of the things you can do with a ramp meter is they come with a couple of plugs with alligator clips on them. You can clip it on the rails, and if you have two rails at a joint between power districts and you clip on the rails on the same side and you get voltage across the rails, it means you're out of phase. So it actually is great for just doing troubleshooting. I have one that's one of the ones in a plastic case in a bag, and use it for troubleshooting just all the time when I have issues. But this one's a fixed one. They sell it in like different forms. They have one that's fixed that doesn't have a plastic case. That's the one I bought. They have ones that are in plastic cases that are more used for troubleshooting.
Thank you.
Hey,
Absolutely.
Phil, could you back up to where you had the URL for your PDF? That
I
went by
certainly
really
will.
fast.
Sorry. So yeah, the URL is just tinyurl.com and then Coast Mod 2 Lay.
Okay, great. I got a screenshot of it now. Thanks.
Cool. You're more than welcome.
Okay.
Mostly I'm
Take care,
feeling
all. I have to.
overwhelmed by what you showed. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably
Guys, I
that's
have
why.
to leave, so I'll take care. Everybody have a good week.
Thanks, Jesse.
Hey, Jesse.
Well, that I guess I'll just kind of open it up then. Is it, anybody have any other questions, comments for modeling in general? Everybody going to submit something for modeling on the coast in 2 weeks, right?
I should wish. My problem is that our kitchen is being remodeled, which means that basically I'm living in a construction site.
Well, the cool thing about modeling on the coast is you just need to pick something and take a couple of pictures of it. So
Well, that was very impressive, and your layout looks like it's going to be fabulous when it's finished.
yeah,
Just looking at the maps and then all of the thinking that is going into everything from electronics to scenery to deck construction to module connections, sort of endless.
well that's I hate to say it, but no, I hate to say it. One of the things I love about model railroading is that there are two things about it that I find that you don't have generally in your life once you retire. And after I retired, I found these went away. One is learning new things. To me, the idea of learning, whether it's learning 3D printing, learning techniques for building things, learning about operations, learning about thinking through what's the structure of all those things. You're learning new things and learning kind of, I think there's this adage that says, if you're not learning, you're dying. The other thing is figuring out problems, planning, and I always used to find that whenever I had a really tough problem, I'd stop and not worry about it. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and I'd have an answer. And it's kind of the same way in model railroading. I find that there are a lot of things you got to think through. How am I going to do this and make it work effectively? And so those things to me are kind of what makes model railroading a lot of fun, and I think keeps you young and moving.
Mhm.
So
I think using the RJ45 connectors is brilliant.
oh,
Yeah.
it's great. Well, so and what it didn't show very effectively there is, the turnout control. The turnouts. What I do is I took an RJ45 cable, a Cat 5 cable. I bought those red 10-foot cables. I bought 10 of those on Amazon for, I don't know, $20. It wasn't much, and just cut one end off, strip it, and then ran, 2 wires to each turnout motor. And on the other end, you just plug it into the Cat 5 the RJ45 punch down box, and now you connect it. And if you want to move something, you just unplug the cable. I mean, it's makes life really easy.
Yeah, and it's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now, and you'll forget the wiring anyway. So it's a good thing you have the connector.
Yep, and
Yeah.
it's easy because
Yeah.
just like on the panel, I've got the name of each of the cables, and each of the cables has the name on it. It's just a piece of print wrapped around it, and so it makes it really easy to make sure everything gets plugged together. And for most of our wiring, when you look at it, the Cat 5 is quite sufficient. It's 26 gauge cable, but at 1 amp and 26 gauge is not a biggie, especially when you look at for a turnout frog. Typically, the whole locomotive is never on the turnout frog. Only one wheel is. So you're only getting part of the current running through it, but it's never more than an amp. And of course, running a turnout motor, we're talking about, to run a tortoise, you're talking about 20 milliamps, which is kind of irrelevant. That's, the thing I always tell people about is if you ever use power over Ethernet, it's significantly more power than a tortoise. So, and they run that at 300 feet. And none of my runs are more than 10 feet on any of this stuff.
Bill, I didn't catch whether you used those suitcase connectors in parts of your setup.
The only place I used the suitcase connectors was on the lighting. And see, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more here. You'll find the right.
My main question about it is a friend of mine said if you use those, you should really use a parallel draw plier to press them in. And I was wondering if that was your experience.
I used a tool that I've got for these that actually clips it. The ones that I used, I don't think I just used a pair of channel locks for them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the only place I used them was here. And let's see, I think, can I zoom on this? Let's see, I'm trying to remember where the zoom is. I thought there was a zoom here. I thought there was a way of zooming in on these. Yeah, you can see these are the only place I used the suitcase connectors were right here. And those are a 2-piece. There's one piece that clamps onto the wire, and then there's a piece you crimp onto the feeder wire, and then they plug into each other. They're like a spade connector. I should have gotten a better picture of those and put in here. I sure thought there was a way to zoom here. Oh, there it is. Yeah, you can kind of see them right there.
Yeah.
So those were just on Amazon. When I figured for that, and I had a couple of them that had problems, but they seemed to work pretty well.
Well, especially since yours are way accessible out in the open. If there were a problem,
Right.
you could fix it easily.
Exactly.
Dave Parks had them all over his Cumberland West layout, but I didn't ever see them get installed, so I don't know if he used a special tool to crimp them.
Yeah, I think I just used a pair of channel locks, and they kind of had it. I should have a picture of one. That's probably a question people have. Actually, you can see a little bit better here the way this is wired. Basically, there's one wire that comes from here and runs over, and then the other wire comes from the drain. So this is positive. This is negative.
You're not showing a picture.
Oh, I'm not. I'm sorry. Let's see. That's as much zoom as I can get. But you can see these. There's this piece that clips on the main wire, and then there's another piece you basically crimp onto the feeder wire, and then they plug together. And what I did was when I built this base, you'll see there are a couple of holes here. So the wires run through the holes, and then they run over, and they actually are soldered to these connectors. There's a little round connector that plugs the back of the light fixture. When I've done this, in person, I have actually a couple of these I threw in a box so you could see them. Just realized that when I do this remotely, it's probably I need a better picture. These are pretty cool, by the way. When you turn just the blue lights on at night, the whole room gets that, Hollywood night lighting scene blue. So anyway, like I said, it's fun just figuring out problems. Probably over-engineered, but it's fun to figure it out. And the cost, what's amazing about this stuff is the cost, like those relays. I just ended up doing another one for the ACCRS club, and I think I bought 10 of those relays. They were $12, so they're really inexpensive. And relays are kind of really cool things to be able to use. And the nice thing about those relays is you feed them 12 volts, and then what they have is they have a optoelectric circuit. So the load on whatever's turning the relay on and off is incredibly low, very low drain. So they work with just about any electronics.
So are you or any of the other module guys able to use any of the cool Bob Brown structure stuff? That's pretty amazing models there.
Yeah, I actually got a couple of buildings from Bob's layout that I'm planning on using. I got a brewery building from him that I'm going to use, and I got a kind of a grocery shop store that I'm going to use. The brewery building is it's going to be an interesting challenge. He had actually built it a little up, and I've got to try to figure out how to lower it without destroying it. We're actually going to take the lime kiln section and try to either turn it into a modular or do something with it. The CCC is.
Good.
We actually have a problem that we almost have too many modules all of a sudden. We have one of our members, Joe Henderson, who had a stroke a number of years ago, had actually put his modules into a home layout. He lives down in Morgan Hill. TSG actually did a video of his layout. And he's now in permanent, long-term care. And his family's actually looking to have the CCC take the layout. And I think we'll take that. And there were some pretty cool modules. If you ever saw it, he built one of the Sierra West sawmills. There was a kit, and that was actually, I think he got second place. There were two of those that were at the Portland NMRA convention, and he got second place by 1 point less than the other guy who got first place. But it's an amazing module. That's a kind of, again, a double module. So what we're trying to do is take those and keep them. It's always a challenge to rehome modules.
Yep.
And how you store them, maintain them. What's saved us is that, Dave has a cabinet shop, and has some space in the cabinet shop, he's been able to keep modules. Because keeping modules, I'm kind of at the point where I really can't build any more modules. I have nowhere to put them. You know, they take up room, and actually I have 2 4-foot modules, and the design concept at this point is that they'll actually slide under that big module where the yard is. I can put them on the floor and slide them underneath there and just store them underneath that module, because otherwise, you know, if they're in a rack, you've got to put the rack somewhere, and the spousal reaction to having racks and modules around the house is not necessarily very positive.
Sounds like the need for excavating a basement.
That's true. Well, we already have, you know, our house is built on the hills. So our lower level is actually really a daylight basement already. So I'm not sure I could excavate anymore. It'd be pretty expensive. And building a structure gets really expensive, and our lot's not very conducive to it. So that's why I'm always envious. You know, the thing that I always say is that to have great model railroads, you have to have 2 things: basements and lousy winter weather. Which is why when you go to Michigan and Minneapolis and, you know, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, the upper Midwest, it's a hotbed of model railroading because you have lousy winter weather and basements. You know, it's interesting. You buy a 2,000 square foot house that's a 1-story house in Michigan, you get a 2,000 square foot basement, just kind of by definition. You know, I don't know. I don't know if I showed that video on I think I did. I think I put it on. It was a long time ago. There was a couple named the Qualmans, and she's actually an MMR and builds amazing structures. And they built a house, and they have a 37 by 92 foot basement.
Wow.
Which is clear span. It's an amazing layout. I mean, literally, you walk in the door, and you can see the whole room. And in the center of the room, there's kind of an area with a stairway that goes up and a bathroom. But other than that, it's clear span, and it's all layout. The whole room is layout. Just amazing. And we unfortunately don't have that. And what you do see is you see guys that, you know, have one of the layouts that was open during the PCR convention was Moss Holder's his last name. I'm trying to remember his first name now, but he's up in you know, up in the Marin area, and he actually did that. He excavated, dug out by hand back under the house to expand his lower level space. So a California basement.
Yeah. I think John Zach did that with his layout.
Yeah, John did that with his. You're right. He dug out. So it's kind of, if you have a house that's built on a hill and you have access underneath, it's, you know, and of course David Parks did the same thing. I don't think he did it by hand, though. I think it was more industrial getting that done.
Yeah, I think Jeff Allen's dug out a basement himself by hand for his layout down in Fremont or Hayward, or I'm not quite sure where he is, somewhere down there.
Well, those guys, if you know a layout like that, you know, connect me with the person so I can get them onto onto the layout tours. You know, the thing I'm finding is that there are layouts that I hear about that we don't have. You know, we have one of the things we did when we started the Coast Up 23 Gmail account is we have a drive. And one of the things on the drive is we have, you know, a folder for layouts, and we have a sheet in there with all the layouts I could find, which, by the way, you know, a lot of them are gone now. But, you know, so, you know, somebody who has a layout, let me know, and I'll contact them and get them on. That way we can ask them to be open when we have an event, and it's a good opportunity for somebody to be open. You know, I think it's cool to be able to show your layout off to people and open it up and have people come see it. But it's also great for people to be able to go see different ways that people have built things, different ways people have solved problems. Because I find if you've got to file that away in your back of your memory, then at some point when you hit the same problem, you'll say, "Oh, I remember that." I mean, that was, one of the things I remember years ago. I went to a layout and he had a long yard, and the turnouts at the ends of the yard, he'd actually replicated switches so you can control the turnouts from either end of the yard. And the reason was that A, it prevented people walking back and forth, but it also dramatically reduced congestion because people weren't moving back and forth. So, things like that, just kind of, and having that in the back of your mind when you do a design so you think about it is, I think, really important.
Okay, well, time to get
Well,
on with my day. So
I'm
thanks
I'm
very
gonna go
much.
check. I'm gonna go check on my wife. My wife had a hip replacement about a week and a half ago, and she actually had a physical therapist come at 10. So I'm gonna go check and see how they're doing. Wish everybody a good week. Send in your stuff for modeling on the coast. If you have some pictures of a model, it doesn't need to be something you're doing today. It can be a model you built 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Just whatever it is, something that you'd like to, show folks what your modeling is. So everyone have a good one. Have a great
Thanks,
weekend, and
Phil.
we'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye now.